Hi everyone! I hope you're all having a great week. As I was working on my own Christmas cards for this year, I figured out a super simple way to make some cards using just a few tools. So I thought since this was so easy, it would be a fun project to share with you all because maybe it's something that you could do. It's certainly not difficult, and all you need is a pencil just to draw a few little marks like I'm doing here, and you can even skip this step. You need a marker, not just any marker, but an elegant writer. And the reason these markers are perfect for this little project is that they're water soluble, and when you apply water on the ink, it helps the ink spread almost like watercolor, and it creates some really interesting marks. I'm also going to be using a white pen, some glitter glue, and well, I'm using this little stencil guide, circle stencil guide to create some circles, but you could just draw some whimsical circles by hand and that would be good enough too. It's really a super simple project and it is a lot of fun. I had so much fun creating the first ones that I thought, well, I need to record this and share it with other people, because if you're in a hurry and you want to make some cards, this is probably one of the best ways to do it. This is the Elegant Writer marker that I was telling you about. I'm using one with a 2mm tip. And there are different tips. I don't think it really matters what tip you use, but I'm going to draw some very, very simple little designs on my cards. And once I'm done doing these little designs, you'll see they're super simple. Anyone can do this. I will use a brush with some water, just some clean water, and we'll start spreading that ink. And it's really cool what happens when you start working on spreading this ink. In order to make my cards look like this is a winter landscape or a winter night scene, I'm also applying black along the upper part of the drawings around the frame. And because I've taped my cards to my substrate, or to my plexi board I should say, I'm using the tape sort of as a guide. I'm just tracing along the tape and it's helping me create a little bit of a rectangle around that area. So I'm just doing that around the part of the drawing that looks like it's going to be the sky. I've taped 4 pieces of paper to my plexiglass and I'm going to be working on 4 of these little paintings all at once. And just to keep it interesting, I'm not going to make them all entirely the same, but if you wanted to, you could make them all exactly the same and that would be completely fine, because when you send a Christmas card to someone, you're not, like you're sending them by mail. Not everyone's going to know that you sent them all the same card. And they're all so cute and whimsical. I think even if they did know that they were getting the same card as someone else, they'd be completely fine with that. I mean, we used to send manufactured cards and people still do, it's a very common thing. So these little cards will be unique and interesting, and I think they're so much fun to create that I hope you'll have a chance to give them a try as well. Once I'm done creating the land and the sky, I'm going to come in with the very same marker, and I'm also going to add some little trees and a few rocks, or what looks like rocks. And I'm keeping it super simple, so I'm just going to be basically drawing one straight line down, and then I'm going to add what looks like tree branches. And again, keeping it super simple. When I start adding water, it's going to make the trees look a little bit more interesting and everything is going to change. But right now, as you can see, it's super simple. I'm ready to start working with my paintbrush. And so I've also pulled out some fine grained table salt, and I'm going to use that to create some textures in the areas where I add water. So I'm just basically going to be using a paintbrush and some clean water, and I'm going to touch the ink. And as I'm touching the ink, it's going to start to spread, kind of like watercolors, and I'm going to be able to use that ink to paint in my sky. I'm going to be careful to just add water on the areas where I want to have color. And it's super simple. It's so much fun. It's the type of project that's so easy that if you have kids or grandkids, you might even be able to do something like this with them. Since the paper dries relatively quickly, as soon as I'm done applying the water to the paper, I come in with my table salt and I add a few little sprinkles of it on all the areas where I just added some water. Where I've drawn in some rocks, I'm going to go in again with my paintbrush and some water, and I'm just going to touch the ink underneath the rocks to make it look like there's some shadow underneath the rocks. And again, super simple, very easy, but it looks so neat. And I really love the effects that the water creates with this ink. Another really cool thing about the ink from Elegant Writer markers is that when the ink is wet and you've just added some water to it, you can use a piece of paper towel to dab some of that ink off, and as you're doing it, it actually changes or makes the color of the ink shift. So it adds a few different little colors to your painting, which I also think looks really, really cool. Once I'm done with the second layer on my first little painting, I can move on to the next one, and so on and so forth. And it's just basically like a repetitive step of going in, adding some water by touching the ink and spreading the ink into the paper. It's, I don't know, I had so much satisfaction and fun from creating these little paintings. There's something really neat about taking the ink and spreading it onto the paper. The fact that as you're doing it, the ink isn't applied really evenly. It kind of leaves interesting little textures. And then you can come in with some salt and add even more texture. It's just, I don't know, there's just something really satisfying about this whole process. And you know, at this time of the year, it can be really stressful. The holidays can be a fun time of the year, but for many people, it can also be a really stressful time of the year for a number of different reasons. So little projects like this can help keep this time of the year a little bit more light and fun, and help keep us in the moment of playing joyfully. And that's one of the things I love about art, is it really helps to keep me in the present moment. And when I'm in the present moment, I just feel better. So when I'm working in the present moment and I'm very focused on what I'm currently doing in this present moment, I'm practicing mindfulness. And mindfulness is a great way to relieve stress and anxiety. And it's also a great way to help take us out of the mind that worries about the past and the future. So I don't know, I guess I really don't have the words to explain why it works, but it just does. When we're focusing on doing something that we're enjoying in this moment, we're not worrying about what happened in the past. We're also not worrying about what may happen in the future. And that helps to create a sense of real relaxation and peace. I guess that's the best way to say it. It's just a very peaceful process to be mindfully doing something right now. It's also really neat to be able to work on 4 little paintings like this all at once, because once I'm done working on one, I move on to the next, and the first one I worked on can dry. And so it keeps the process flowing, and it also prevents us from getting in that part of our mind that feels stuck in worrying about what we're going to do next. We just keep moving, keep letting the process flow, and it keeps making it so simple and just so much fun. Yeah, I feel a little bit like a kid doing this. I'm having so much fun. This is the kind of card I could create a ton of, because they're just so easy and so much fun. It's so much fun to play with this ink. So I'm also going into the inside of my circles slightly with my brush, but I'm being very careful not to spread too much ink in there. And once I've spread a little bit, I go in with my paper towel just to dab a lot of that ink out. It will leave a little bit of the ink in that spot, but because this is supposed to represent a moon, I also want to make sure it stays really light. Yeah, adding a little bit of that ink is good, because it also, I mean, the moon is not completely white. If you look at the moon in the sky, you can see the craters and all of that. So it's kind of neat to be able to add a little tiny bit of color without adding too much. Once my paper is completely dry, I rub the salt off the areas where I added some. And then I come back in with my elegant writer and I trace the contour of my sky once again. I'm going to come back in with my wet brush and I'm going to try to darken the sky and create a little bit more texture doing this. Before I work on darkening the sky, however, I'm going to come back in with my brush and my paper towel, and I'm going to use my wet brush to go over the tops of the rocks. Then I'm going to dab some of that ink off, and because I'm doing it right away, it's only going to leave a slight bit of color and add a little bit more visual interest to the area of the painting that's like snow. It's snow, so it's supposed to be light, so I'm not going to add too much color in that area, but I think it does need a little bit of color, and adding that color will also help delineate the painting once the tape is removed. So you'll notice that on some of the paintings I will add a little bit of color, like on this one for instance, and then on the other ones I won't spread the ink, and you'll see that there is a difference. Once I've finished spreading the ink on my sky, I'm going to come back in with a little bit more salt to create yet again more texture. Just as long as the color underneath the ink is lighter than the ink that's being currently applied, when I apply the salt, it will create some interesting textures. Once I'm done with this second layer of ink, I'll let everything dry and then we'll move on to the next part of my process. After rubbing this second layer of salt off my paper, I'm now coming in with my white pen and I'm gonna start adding some little details to make my scene a little bit more whimsical. So a moon, of course, is very bright, and when it's shining in the sky, you can almost see like a halo of light around it. So keeping things super simple, I'm just using my white pen to draw some uneven circles around my moon. And then using the white pen again, I go into my Christmas trees and not Christmas trees, my pine trees, which remind me of Christmas because they're covered in snow. I'm coming in with my white pen and I'm just adding what looks like snow to my trees. I also use the pen to draw a little bit of white ink over the snow tops because of course snow is white, and so I want to bring in some of that white ink. But because there's a little bit of black ink underneath, it's going to seep into the ink of the pen, and it's not going to keep the ink super white, but it's just going to help delineate things, and I think it's going to look even nicer. I do the same thing to my little rocks that I added in my painting, and then once I'm done with that, I'm just going to come in with my pen and I'm going to start adding little dots of white into my sky. So this can look like snow and it can also look like stars, but in order to add stars, I've bought some glitter glue and I'm going to add that instead. So stay tuned, that's coming up. So let's see how many art supplies I've actually used so far. I've used some paper, some art tape, and this was only to tape my paper to my plexiglass. If you didn't want to do that, I'm sure it would be completely fine to work without it. I like to tape my paper just so it doesn't buckle while I'm working, but it's all according to your own preference. After that, I went in and created some little drawings using my Elegant Writer marker. I did use a pencil ahead of time, but really all I did was create a few little simple marks, and I could have completely skipped that step altogether. And then after using my Elegant Writer, I came in with a brush, just a round brush, and I used the same size. I think I was using a size 8. And I added water to the ink to spread the ink. I also added some table salt, so that's another tool that I use to help create some texture in my skies. And now I'm working with a white pen. So that's not very many art supplies, and here I am creating these really cute little Christmas cards in a relatively cheap way. So I'm pretty excited about that. The last supply I'm going to use on these little paintings is this Stickles Glitter Glue by Ranger Inks. And it's perfect for this type of project because it's not as messy as just using, regular Elmer's glue along with sparkles that you just sprinkle on the paper. Now that's possible. And that's what I used to do, but I found it to be a little bit messy. What's neat about this is that the glitter is already in the glue and the glue is clear, so I can just apply little dabs of it here and there, and when it catches the light, it will make it look like my moon and some stars are glittering in my sky. So that's what I like about this, and it's really easy to apply. As if the rest of the project wasn't fun enough, this is another part of the process that I really enjoy, when it's time to pull off that tape and check out the little paintings. Well, I guess I lied because I brought in one other supply, and this is not 100% necessary, but I thought it would be neat to add a little bit of black ink to the edges of my cards, just so they stand out a little bit more when I add them to my actual cards. I'm doing this with Ranger Archival ink, and I'm just basically dipping the edges of my little paintings into the ink. But I'm also going to show you how I used a Sharpie to do exactly the same thing. I don't tend to like using Sharpies because I find that they smell very strong, and I'm very prone to migraines, so I tend to avoid strong smelling products like these Sharpie markers. But they do work quite well to do exactly what I just did. So I'm basically going to be very careful, and I'm going to take the Sharpie and I'm going to just use the marker to basically rub the edge of it against the edges of my little card paintings, and it's going to do exactly the same thing as the Ranger ink did. The Ranger ink doesn't smell, so that's one of the reasons I like to use it. And it's also relatively easy to just rub my card edges across the ink. But again, you can use a Sharpie marker, or if you have other markers that don't smell quite as strongly as Sharpie markers, they would work just as well. One thing about them is that, this one in particular has a very big tip, so I think it's easier. If I were working with a smaller tip, it might be a little bit harder, and there might be a chance that I could get some of that ink on the front of the card, which I'm trying to avoid doing. But there are options, that's all I'm trying to say. I've attached my little paintings to some cards, and now we can have a closer look at all the ones I created today. I like how the stickles added a little bit of glitter without it being too much, and I think it was a really fitting way to end these little paintings. I really loved creating these little paintings, and so I not only explored the process of creating them horizontally, but I also created some vertical cards. And really, with an elegant writer, a white pen, a brush, and some water, it's amazing what you can create. And there we have it. Another fun little project comes to an end. Thank you so much for making the time to join me on this journey. I hope you have a wonderful week, and happy creating!